He's been a thorn in the side of superheroes in the Marvel Universe since first appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 50, published in 1967. Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, who seemed to always have a firm grip on the underworld of New York City and beyond, and continues to have an impact on the Marvel Cinematic Universe to this day. Welcome back to the channel, everyone, in this week's featured comic book recap. We're going to go all the way back to that initial storyline that saw everyone's favorite friendly neighborhood Spider-Man when he first ran afoul of the Kingpin in Wilson Fisk's first ever comic book appearance. This storyline will cover issues 50, 51, and 52 of The Amazing Spider-Man, essential reading for any webhead fanatic. But before we begin, we'd appreciate it if you would consider hitting the like and subscribe button, commenting, and sharing out this video. It really helps out the channel each and every week. With that, let's begin. Issue number 50 of The Amazing Spider-Man delivers to us one of the most iconic covers ever produced by Stan Lee and Johnny Romita for the story titled Spider-Man No More. Spider-Man is in the midst of stopping an office robbery. 4 armed gunmen are getting put down by our web-slinger, all while he dodges bullets and offers his typical insults. As Spider-Man proves too fast and agile for gunfire, the 4 robbers rush him and pile on. Thinking they have him down for good, they begin to get cocky, but Spider-Man reminds them that it's not that easy to keep him down as he strikes with both fists and both feet, knocking all of them backwards. Having had enough fun, Spider-Man uses a door to smash over the 4 men, effectively trapping them all together. And as Spidey says, it's a good way to save on webbing, especially since they raised the price at the corner drugstore. As Spider-Man leaves, one of the victims thanks him, while the other tells her to stay back. How can they be sure Spider-Man isn't just as bad as the crooks? Spider-Man assures them all that he's not, and as he scales the walls of a nearby building, he laments the editorials of J. Jonah Jameson and the Daily Bugle, because they have turned half the city against him. And as he returns to his normal identity as Peter Parker, he wonders what it is about him. The Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Captain America, all of them beloved by the public. But Spider-Man, the more he helps, the more they hate him. Minutes later, when Peter Parker returns to his apartment, he's met by his roommate, Harry Osborn, who tells him that Mrs. Watson called. Peter's Aunt May is sick. Harry offers to drive Peter to her bedside, but Peter decides his bike will be faster. And while speeding down the street, he blames himself for not being there for his Aunt May, being too busy playing superhero to strangers instead of caring for loved ones. When Peter reaches home, Mrs. Watson tells him that the doctor got there just in time. Aunt May is sleeping and recovering. Still, Peter continues to blame himself. A normal guy would have been home, would have been available. Peter was too busy helping people who were afraid of him. And as Peter leaves, he's full of regret for not being present in his Aunt May's life. He struggles to come to terms with the fact that Aunt May raised him, treated him like a son, replacing the mother that he never had. Peter is so upset, he cannot even study for his exams. The next day, after his test, Peter's professor asks to see him. He warns Peter that his grades have been declining steadily, to which Peter promises to buckle down and do better. A moment later, Gwen Stacy asked Peter over that night to a little gathering of friends. But Peter, who has been waiting for this moment for a long time, has to ask for a rain check. After all, Aunt May is sick, his grades are in the toilet. He can't afford to skirt responsibility right now. For Gwen, she is disappointed in the response. And as he walks back to his bike, Peter continues to reflect on how being Spider-Man has ruined his social life. He cannot date Gwen. He cannot even find the time to date Mary Jane. He has not had time for anything except new problems. As he arrives to his apartment, Peter is still turning his thoughts over in his head. He could not take a job at Oscorp because it might interfere with Spider-Man duties at night. He's beginning to hate the sound of that name now, Spider-Man. Turning on the television does Peter no good either. J. Jonah Jameson is on the screen ranting and raving about Spider-Man being a public menace, an enemy to the people, that he should be found, unmasked, and then destroyed. JJ then offers $1,000 reward to anyone who can capture and help convict Spider-Man. And this news makes Peter realize that Jameson really does hate him. It's not an act for publicity. He sincerely thinks that Spider-Man is a menace to society. Peter begins to think about what Jameson's been saying. And then Peter begins to think Jameson might be right. After all, what is he doing all of this hero work for? Peter leaves his apartment, walking in the dark and the rain. He is convinced that his motivations were never pure and that there's only one thing left to do. He tosses his Spider-Man suit in the garbage, determined to put away the toys of youth and become a man. He is Spider-Man no more. The next day, a young boy races through the Daily Bugle, ignoring the commands of Miss Brandt to stop, but the young boy ignores her. He has a surprise for J. Jonah Jameson. He has found Spider-Man's costume in the garbage and is bringing it in for a reward. Jameson is beside himself with glee and triumph. He's finally won over Spider-Man. He's forced him to quit. He's forced him to give up. He orders a special edition of the paper printed for the next day. When the public reads it, they're concerned about the news and think it cannot be true. Even the police have opened an investigation. But for JJ, everything's coming up roses all around. Every copy of the special edition has sold out. This has now become the biggest human interest story of the year. It gives Jameson a chance to go on The Tonight Show and plug his newspaper. And every network runs specials on the impact of Spider-Man being missing in action. Enter the Kingpin. His back turned to his associate, he tells him to spread the word. Without Spider-Man, his plans can come to full fruition. He will take over the underworld, and there'll be a summit to let everyone know just who is in charge. Meanwhile, outside, it is hard not to notice that something big is brewing. Rival mobsters are meeting, talking, whispering. Something is in the winds of New York City. We see a low-life criminal in the shadows. His name, Old Patch, a stool pigeon for the police, and he wants to know what's going on. But he's out of his league, and as he tries to butt in, he's told to scram. The heads of the different mob factions meet to discuss the new arrangement. Most of them are okay with the Kingpin taking charge. Meanwhile, Old Patch reveals himself to be Frederick Foswell, formerly known as the Big Man, who once briefly led crime in New York City until Spider-Man put a stop to it. Now, he's a reporter working for the only man who would hire him, the only man who would give him a second chance, J. Jonah Jameson. And he has his trust. As JJ shows off his new trophy to Foswell, that of Spider-Man's suit, Peter Parker enters to tell JJ not to expect any more photos from him. He's going to focus on college and study hard. JJ is incensed at this. Parker was his best photographer. Sure, he never paid him very well, but that's because he didn't want to spoil him. Still, for Jameson, it's a stab in the back. For Foswell, Parker quitting when Spider-Man disappears? Could it be a coincidence? In the wake of all this, crime runs rampant, even in daylight. The cops are overwhelmed and the criminals no longer fear running into the spider. Back in Kingpin's office, we learn that all the crime was a test to really see if Spider-Man was truly gone. Turns out, he is. And for Kingpin, now we can implement his master plan. He will consolidate all of the crime in the city and run it like a true business empire. The next day at Empire State University, Parker ignores all the talk about crime and the missing Spider-Man. Gwen runs over to him. She has a letter from Flash Thompson, who is serving in Vietnam. Gwen is excited about reading it. Parker offers her a ride home. He realizes she has a thing for Flash, but what he does not realize is that she is more interested in him. But Peter Parker is too blind to see it. Peter returns to his Aunt May, who is awake and feeling better. Peter fails to notice that Mary Jane Watson is also there, much to MJ's dismay. How could any guy not notice her? As Peter turns to talk, she tells him she has to go to rehearsal. MJ asks Peter for a ride, but Peter wants to stay with his aunt for a while and declines. And later on, as he rides home, he feels like $1,000,000. He has no guilt about being away. He has time to study, time for his family, time for his friends. For Peter, he should have ditched Spider-Man a long time ago. But as Peter relaxes, the Kingpin's men are robbing the welfare office. The report comes across on Peter's police radio, and immediately he wonders what will happen to the needy if the money is not recovered. Handicapped people, old people, helpless infants, all of them will suffer. Peter begins to change, but then he remembers he pledged not to be that guy anymore, and he simply goes to sleep. The next morning, Harry reads from the paper about the robbery. Peter tries to change the subject, asking about Harry's father. Harry wonders if Peter is going to take the offer to work for Oscorp. Peter believes that he will, now that he has the time. After class, Peter asks Gwen if she wants to grab something to eat. Gwen tells him that she has a date with Harry. The two flirt a bit, Peter still oblivious to Gwen's actual intentions. He then rides over to Aunt May's, where he finds Mrs. Watson and his aunt leaving for the movies. Strange. He quit being Spider-Man to make time for family and friends, but now it seems like they don't need him. I guess it just looks like another study night. But as he rides by a warehouse, he hears screams for help on the rooftop. Peter decides to act. He climbs the wall and vaults over the ledge so fast that the criminals don't have a chance to see his face, and will never have the chance, as he knocks them out in a single deft move. He keeps his face hidden from the watchman he just saved, and leaves without saying a word. Peter stops at the pier to reflect on what he just did, breaking his promise to himself. Why did he do it? And then Peter remembers his Uncle Ben, and the watchman he just saved looked a lot like him. Peter remembers the feeling of not stopping a robber that one night. After all, it was none of his business. But that robber went on to murder his Uncle Ben, and Peter could have prevented it from happening. That night was when he really became Spider-Man. That feeling of doing nothing when you could have done something, only to be flooded with guilt afterwards because innocent people got hurt. That's why he climbed the building and saved the Watchman. That's why he's torn right now, Uncle Ben. And that is why he cannot renounce his spider powers. No matter the burden or the sacrifices he must make, he can never permit one innocent being to come to harm because Spider-Man failed to act. Meanwhile, in Fisk's office, Foswell is confronting Kingpin. With Spider-Man gone, he cannot permit anyone else to run the rackets in the city except for himself. If anyone is going to organize the mobs, it's going to be Foswell, not the Kingpin. Foswell tells the Kingpin that he can be his lieutenant now. The Kingpin responds by using a disintegrator ray built into his cane to destroy the hidden gun Foswell concealed in his hat. Foswell is then restrained and held captive while the Kingpin reminds him that he does not make mistakes. Meanwhile, Peter Parker scales the steep wall of the Daily Bugle. He enters J. Jonah Jameson's office to find his costume still on display. He quickly changes into it as JJ enters to find him sitting at his desk, feet up. He rips into JJ, telling him he's been recruiting. He's going to flood the city with new Spider-Man, and good luck printing the retraction. For JJ, he is beside himself with grief and frustration. Spider-Man is still alive, and now he's back. Our hero leaps out of the window and back into the city, back into the fight. Issue number 51 picks up our story with the title, In the Clutches of the Kingpin. The Kingpin is meeting with the heads of all the factions, preparing to launch a crime wave unlike any other. However, there's a new problem to take care of first. He asked for that night's edition of the Daily Bugle. On the front page, J. Jonah Jameson's editorial about a rumored underworld takeover is the banner headline. Kingpin orders his men to make JJ an offer. Buy him off. Otherwise, the Bugle can find a new publisher. He sends Blinker and his men to fetch JJ, while the Big Turk and his gang prepare to restart their collection racket at every service station in town. Big Turk isn't happy about starting out so small, but Kingpin has his disintegrator cane, so they'll do as they're told. Besides, Spider-Man's not around to stop them. However, unbeknownst to them, the wall crawler is web-slinging across the city as they speak. Later on, Spider-Man sees Big Turk and his mob shake down one of these service stations and intervenes. He quickly webs up their guns, forcing them into hand-to-hand combat. 5-on-1 ensues. As Spider-Man wrestles with a few of them, one of the men mentions Kingpin, a name Spidey promises to remember when Big Turk karate chops him from behind, but to no avail. Big Turk sees that this is not a winning contest, so he runs, leaving the rest of the men behind. Besides, he has to get back to the Kingpin and tell him all that's going on, that Spider-Man has returned. And as he speeds off, Spider-Man clocks all of the remaining men, sending them to the ground, only to pick one of them up to interrogate as police sirens scream in the distance. For Spider-Man, only one question: who or what is the Kingpin? As the police collect the leftovers, Spider-Man climbs to collect his camera so he can sell the pics, but then he remembers he quit. He'll have to swallow his pride and convince Jameson that he was only kidding. And back at Kingpin's office, Kingpin slides back a set of curtains to see Frederick Foswell held captive through a one-way mirror. The Kingpin does not want to off Foswell yet. He has plans for him in the future. And for the Kingpin, Foswell's experience may be of use. He asks for Foswell to be brought into the office so the two of them can have a little talk. And so, Foswell tells the Kingpin that he would be a fool to pass up his help, to which the Kingpin replies, he is no fool. As Foswell reaches into his jacket pocket, the Kingpin gives him a warning concerning his cane and its capabilities. But Foswell tells the Kingpin that he fights with his brains, not guns, and he was just reaching for a cigarette. This is when Big Turk and his driver rush into the meeting, screaming about Spider-Man and accusing Kingpin of setting them up. Foswell is amazed they saw Spider-Man. For the Kingpin, the interruption is rude and disrespectful. Big Turk and his driver threaten the Kingpin and rush him. The Kingpin tells his man Flint to back off. He can handle this discipline problem himself and deliver a lesson Big Turk will never forget. Big Turk takes out Flint anyways, giving Kingpin time to remove his jacket. He prefers this time to use his own fist instead of the cane. Turk swings at Kingpin, who catches his fist in a vice-like grip. It is then that Big Turk understands that the Kingpin is not a fat, out-of-shape pushover, but solid muscle. Kingpin begins to break the Turk's fingers as Big Turk screams for mercy, which Kingpin delivers by throwing him across the room, calling the Turk a coward. Foswell, who observed the whole fight, cannot believe it. The Kingpin is not only rich, and has that cane of his, but his strength is unbelievable. The Kingpin orders the Turk to his feet and sends him away, reminding him that the Kingpin is his master now and for the rest of their lives. Kingpin then turns to Foswell. He will use him to get to Jameson, who at the time is venting his frustration at not being able to get the real story of the underworld, and Frederick Foswell is nowhere to be seen, his star reporter. Instead, reporter Ned Leeds enters the office and JJ orders him to work night and day on this story. He wants answers, not excuses. Also, they need a replacement for Parker, and right on cue, Parker returns, telling Jameson that he's back, but Jameson asks why. Who wants you? Who missed you? Ned Leeds provides the answer. They all did. JJ tells Parker that he would not take him back on a bet, to go peddle his photos elsewhere. When Parker turns to leave, he tells JJ he's got new pics of Spider-Man in action. That changes everything. JJ tells Parker that this is his lucky day, that he forgives him and is taking him back. JJ kicks them all out of his office. Parker then learns that Fred Foswell is missing, and he rides off determined to figure out who the Kingpin is. Peter passes by the Silver Spoon Diner. Inside, MJ, Gwen, and Harry are hanging out. They notice Peter, but he doesn't notice them. For MJ, she wishes he stopped to give her a ride home. For Gwen, she's smiling because MJ doesn't have alone time with Peter. For Harry, he reminds everybody that Gwen is his date this evening. And as Peter rides around trying to get lucky, his spider sense goes off as he sees 4 men enter an upscale club. He changes outfits and scales the building, prepared for anything. He notices through the window that the 4 men have cornered the manager and are threatening him with a gun. The time to act is now. Spider-Man crashes through the window and on top of the goons. The men are no match for our hero, who batters and tosses them around. Then, suddenly, one of the men tosses a miniaturized grenade into the mess, hitting Spider-Man and giving them all a chance to escape. As the men run, the patrons notice that the blast weakened the support beams. As Spider-Man recovers, the manager blames him for the mess. Spider-Man attaches a tracker to one of the fleeing crooks before getting under the main sagging support beam while pleading with the manager to get everyone out. And as the club empties, Spider-Man tosses the beam aside and dives out of the window, avoiding injury. And as he leaps away, the building collapses. Now, all he has to do is follow the tracker. But as he swings across the city, another group of Kingpin's goons approach the Daily Bugle. They notice that J. Jonah Jameson is working late and decide it's time for him to take a vacation. They tell JJ that they're bringing him to see the Kingpin. For JJ, that means he was right all along. But also, what did the Kingpin want with him? Minutes later, blindfolded, JJ is being held by gunpoint in the back of a car and then finally into the Kingpin's office. The Kingpin asks that Jameson stop printing stories about a crime wave in the city. Jameson refuses. It's his paper. He'll write about whatever he wants. For the Kingpin, that's too bad for J. Jonah Jameson. Just then, the men from the club arrive with news of Spider-Man's interference. For the Kingpin, this is getting old. But they tell him that the whole building collapsed and that they're pretty sure Spider-Man was in it. For the Kingpin, then the mission was a success. Spider-Man's dead. Only one thing left to do: get rid of Jameson. Kingpin calls out Foswell by name, who is stunned he was revealed to be there. Foswell pretends to be advising JJ for his benefit, but Jameson does not believe it. For him, Foswell is no better than Spider-Man. And speaking of Spidey, he's almost to the penthouse office where Jameson is being held. Spider-Man peers inside the window to see a mountain of a man sitting behind a desk. That must be the Kingpin. He also sees Jameson being held hostage, and Foswell standing behind the Kingpin. Spider-Man uses his spider signal to get their attention. The Kingpin orders his men outside to the balcony to confront the wall crawler, and as they exit the penthouse, Spider-Man is above them, waiting to trap them with his webbing. Spider-Man then comes crashing down on the trapped thugs, knocking them unconscious. The Kingpin sees just how strong our hero is, and tells his aide Flint to back away. The Kingpin will handle this himself. Using his cane, he blasts a bolt of energy at Spider-Man, who easily avoids it. The Kingpin then tries to strike him, but Spidey is just too fast. Spider-Man hits the Kingpin hard, but to the wall crawler's amazement, he doesn't go down, nor does he stay down. Spider-Man grabs Kingpin's cane and smashes it. For Spider-Man, he makes the same mistake everyone else has. He assumes the Kingpin is just fat and slow, but he isn't. The Kingpin lands a crushing blow to the stomach. Then, rushing Spidey, grabs him by the ankle, slamming him into a brick wall. Dazed, our hero gets up and gives the Kingpin a taste of his own punishment. But the Kingpin is able to absorb the hit. And with Spider-Man up close and personal, the Kingpin's tie pin expels gas right into Spider-Man's face. Spider-Man drops to one knee. The gas is already in his lungs. He's beginning to black out. The Kingpin reminds them all that this is the reason why he is in charge. For Jameson, he's delighted to be there to see it happen. Spider-Man defeated. but he's sad it had to happen this way. For Spider-Man, he's now at the mercy of the Kingpin. Our story concludes in issue 52 of The Amazing Spider-Man, titled To Die a Hero. The Kingpin and his men carry an unconscious Spider-Man and a terrified J. Jonah Jameson into the subcellar. Jameson demands an answer from the Kingpin. What are they going to do with him? The Kingpin answers Jameson had his chance to stop writing stories about the crime wave, but he refused. Now he and Spider-Man will be eliminated. They bring our ill-fated duo into a brick chamber with metal pipes, a metal restraint resting in the middle, to which the wall crawler and Jameson are bound to, and as the goons leave, the water begins to flow and fill the chamber. The Kingpin has the chamber sealed as Jameson tries desperately to wake up Spider-Man, and with a little bit of luck, our hero begins to come to. He assesses the situation, hands bound in iron bands, water rushing in, and Jameson babbling on. But the iron is not very strong, and Spidey manages to break free. But for JJ, it's no big deal. After all, are they going to breathe? Through their fingers? Spider-Man tries to ignore JJ as he spins webbing into the air. Jameson cannot understand what Spider-Man is doing and thinks to himself that our hero must be out of his mind. Meanwhile, back at the Daily Bugle, Ned Leeds discovers the damage in JJ's office and that he is now missing. They come to the conclusion that he must have been abducted. Ned decides to try and find his missing boss, even with Betty Grant pleading with him not to. As Ned takes off, Spider-Man continues to expel webbing, hoping he does not run out. JJ just continues to face certain death, but Spidey is almost done. A dome of webbing that will trap the air, allowing them to breathe. Jameson needs to be dragged into safety by Spidey himself because he does not see the logic in what is being done. A web bubble, triple thick, strong enough to hold air in and keep the water pressure out. The only thing is, how long can it last? Outside the chamber, the Kingpin awaits for the water to drain now that enough time has gone by that both men must be dead by now. However, the Kingpin is sure of himself and leaves before the chamber door can be opened. 30 seconds later, the door is opened to reveal a cocoon-like web in the middle of the room. Startled and not knowing what they're looking at, the men do not anticipate Spider-Man bursting through, landing knockout blows to each. More men arrive, this time firing weapons, but Spidey is able to avoid the shots, disarm the attacker, and slam his head against the brick, adding him to the pile of unconscious bad guys. Jameson continues to berate Spider-Man, even though he just saved his life. But for J. Jonah Jameson, Spider-Man saved himself. He was just along for the ride. Spider-Man ignores Jameson's words. He understands that he's terrified and acting out. And as they make their way out of the chamber, more men appear on the stairwell. Spider-Man leaves JJ behind while he handles the guards, pulling them down one by one. As Spidey engages 3 more men, he urges Jameson to run. Take this chance to get back to the Bugle. But Jameson is scared stiff. Finally, Spider-Man motivates him the only way he knows how, by telling him JJ is his next target. This gets the Daily Bugle publisher running for his life, except he isn't focused and runs directly into a steam pipe full speed. Jameson has knocked himself out. But Spider-Man assumes he's made it to safety. For our wall crawler, it's time for the main event. He rushes off to find the Kingpin. As this is all happening, the Kingpin is bragging to Foswell about ending Spider-Man and Jameson. Foswell seems nervous. He tells the Kingpin that he will go along with anything to make a buck, but cold-blooded murder just isn't his style. The Kingpin is riled up by being called a murderer. For him, it is just eliminating obstacles. Now, Foswell has become an obstacle too, one that must also be eliminated. The Kingpin grabs him, preparing to beat him to death. Just then, Spider-Man throws open the office doors, much to the ire of the Kingpin. The Kingpin throws Foswell aside in favor of fighting Spider-Man, who charges ahead at the behemoth. In that same moment, across city at the Silver Spoon Diner, Flash Thompson returns home from Vietnam. Gwen and Harry greet him with smiles and laughter. Flash flirts with Gwen and then asks about MJ and Parker. Just then, MJ walks in, delighted to see Flash. However, Flash has nothing but insults for Peter Parker. If he only knew the truth about Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Back in Kingpin's penthouse, not wanting to be gassed again, Spidey covers Kingpin's tie pin with webbing. But now, Spidey's hands are in Kingpin's steel grip. As the two continue to beat the snot out of each other, Foswell sneaks behind the bar and grabs a loaded gun. He wonders where Jameson has gone off to. As he sneaks out of the rooms, Spider-Man lands a knee to Kingpin's stomach, and at the same time, taunts him, injuring his pride with verbal attacks. The Kingpin stalks closer. Spider-Man positions himself on the ceiling and delivers a double-fisted shot to the chin. For the first time, the Kingpin is falling backwards. Impressed with Spider-Man's strength, the Kingpin commends his foe on such a feat of battle. while also grabbing Spidey's arm in the process. Now both are falling to the ground uncontrollably. After they hit, the Kingpin bounces right back up and begins to run away. The wiser choice at this moment. There's a hidden pneumatic tube behind the bookcase, which sends the Kingpin straight down to safety. Spider-Man attempts to follow by prying the bookcases open, but then, suddenly, the tube explodes, denying any access to our hero. Spider-Man finds another way to the cellar, and hopefully a way to cut off Kingpin's escape. Meanwhile, Foswell is hunting for Jameson, who's just coming to from his concussion. He's scared, confused, and unaware of where he is or what has happened. He panics, thinking that the water dripping on his head is blood. As he runs and he screams, the Kingpin's men hear him. They pursue him, but Foswell finds JJ first. For Foswell, J. Jonah Jameson is the only man to help him, the only man to give him a second chance, so he will return the favor and cover his escape. Kingpin's men shoot, but Foswell steps in front of the bullet intended for Jameson. Spider-Man hears the gunfire and rushes towards it. He finds the Kingpin's men trying to trick Foswell into giving up, offering a doctor in return, but Foswell is not biting. Spider-Man ends the standoff himself, leaping over the gunmen and slamming them together, putting them down. Jameson pleads for Spider-Man to get a doctor, but Foswell himself knows it's too late. He dies regretting his life. Spider-Man sees the sadness in the whole story. JJ giving the ex-con a chance, the ex-con repaying the debt, and JJ telling him that Foswell died a hero. As the police arrive and things begin to sort themselves out, Spider-Man knows that the Kingpin will not be found. He made his escape. Ned Leeds arrives to get the story from J. Jonah Jameson, who calls Foswell a hero one more time, but refuses to call Spider-Man anything but a menace, because you never know what side he's on. And although frustrated at hearing this, Spider-Man knows that this is just how it's gonna be, that this is the life of a hero. But for now, Spider-Man has earned a rest. Thus ends the Kingpin's first ever appearance in the Marvel comic book universe. I hope you enjoyed it. If you need more comic book fun, click on the thumbnail at the end of this video for our look back at the first appearance and backstory of Dr. Otto Octavius, otherwise known as Doc Ock. Thank you for watching. Remember, I'm still your reluctant gringo from somewhere south of the border. Salut and a huevo.